Hey guys, Memphis here. Just a friendly Canadian reminder to keep force spying, and you're watching Thorin's YouTube.
Right, this is going to be another episode of the Know-It-Alls of Counter-Strike. Tommy's here with me as usual, and I thought actually, bearing in mind, I think it was maybe 2 ago, we had that whole discussion where I got you to break down like how a market is set for salaries. I think, by the way, that I made a clip out of it as well. That should be required viewing because obviously most fans have no clue and they're still saying things, dude, that trigger me like, no one should be paid that, or that's greedy, or like, they're not paying them enough. It's like, how could you know without knowing the relative market value? How could you know what people are offering? And then people really think, by the way, that the price is based on how good you are. It's based on demand, of course, for fuck's sake. It's the most obvious economic principle ever.
About your HLTV rating.
I know, exactly. Because, you know, that's the reason why, by the way, without going into a tangent, that's the reason why they were so fucking enraged at this whole, like, MIBR drama, because they were like, look, but these guys were killing it at Flashpoint. It's like, the question is anyone else in the world willing to sign them? And by the way, you know what? I don't think lurppis even needs to say anything on that one. I think he just sort of fucking won that one by himself, didn't he? Like, you know, here's the joke of guys. We let the market decide that one, didn't we? We let the market decide. So here's what I want to do on this one is, there's some other topics in the world of finance business that I actually think we can get into so much interesting stuff here, because all these conversations come up on all the podcasts, mate. When they talk about player signings, they don't just stay in their lane and talk about if the player's good or bad for this team, or if he's good or bad generally. They try to wade in people who have zero business experience, and I don't claim to have any. I just actually go out there and try and find things out before I talk out my ass. They talk about things like, man, there's just number 2 heights. So how do you know? How the fuck do you know what the offers are? You don't know anything about this industry. You're just a guy who knows if they're good in the game. So things to me like, is a buyout too much? How much should a buyout be? Should a team sell a player if they can get a lot for him? When should they keep him? Agents, what are their roles? I feel like there's so much we can do here. So let's just start with the whole buyout topic, right? Because people might have seen on my channel, I'll link it above. I did a video and it was about crazy buyouts. That was actually the title of it. And it was actually inspired by the information, because I was able to give an exact example, that ropz from Mousespots, who everyone knows is a fucking monster player right now and was really good even when Mousespots was kind of shit with the old lineup. He's someone where when his contract ends, apparently at this point in time, I think it'd be like 8-9 months, he would obviously be one of the most eligible players to join, by the way, the best teams in the world, because they're the ones actually now trying to get him. We're talking about teams where basically, here's the spoiler to fans, without saying who the teams are, the teams that are trying to get him think it's worth paying a lot because he's the last piece. They think if they add him, that's it. We're there. We can win the major. We can be the number 1 team. We can be the dominant. It's not like they're just building a team. He could go and join a much better team than the Mousespots lineup. The problem is Mousespots knows that, and if you know the history of Mousespots in CSGO, like in 1.6, yeah, they won the best because they had the German talent, they had all that money. But in CSGO, they've always been a team that, for me, they're the real team that moneyballs, lurppis, and all the dumbass fans use that for every other team. They're the team that gets people, usually pretty cheap, and gets them on salaries that aren't the top 10 salaries, top 5 salaries in the world, but they become a top 10, top 5 team, so they get way more value out of it, and then they always sell people for a good price. They get a Nico buyout, they get a Carrigan, but they get whatever deals they need, basically, and they seem to always actually be able to survive. And I have to say, if you were to track ranking against what I imagine they've paid, they're probably doing pretty well out of a lot of teams. So when you hear a story like this, if they were going to let ropz go, first of all, even though there's all these people bidding, they're only going to let him go for a massive number. It's $1.5 million, let's say, is a rough figure here. So we'd be talking, by the way, about potentially the biggest buyout of all time in CSGO for a banging player, certainly. Now, if you're a fan, the problem I see on this one is, if you want ropz to be on a better team, you're just going to say, sell him, he wants to go, which is irrelevant. If you're someone who's a fan of Mouse, you're going to go, don't sell him, he's the best player. I want to know, like, what would the factors be if you're in this scenario? Like, when should you sell a player like that who is your best player, but you could get an enormous price? When should you hold out if there's a lot of people? What are your thoughts on this particular case?
Well, I mean, we'll start just by talking about, like, the things that go into the value of buyout maybe a little bit, because I think once you go into, like, when you would sell or why not, I think it gets more complicated. So just tackle one by one. So first of all, I think that the one thing that's actually most often very misunderstood is the impact that contract length has on buyouts, because it's all about leverage. Let's just say hypothetically, there's a team that wants to buy just any very good player, doesn't have to be a ropz, and the roster lock is coming up for the major in 2 weeks. It's completely relevant if the guy's contract expires in 3 weeks. Makes no difference. They need him in 2 weeks, which means they're going to have to pay. And the person on the other side of the table, if they're smart, they know that they're going to use that against them in the negotiation. So there's been, I think, many scenarios where people have kind of publicly talked about, oh, like only has 6 months left on the contract. Well, it doesn't matter if you need them now.
Yes.
And the other piece, by the way, is, if you're the player, a lot of the time the players feel the pressure to get whatever whatever transfer they want done now, because they know as well as anybody that whatever roster they want to join is one bullshit result away from not wanting to make a roster change at all. As you and I know, that's how the whole industry works. So say ropz, you said, in the neighborhood of 1.5 million. I mean, he's a very young player. He's like 19. Is he 20?
I think he's maybe 21, but he's fairly inexperienced and young. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he's very experienced actually, but he's still very young. So like you could there's a case to be made that he could be your like number one star, number two guy for like 5 years, first of all. So like, it's not like somebody that you're paying a big price that you're amortizing over 2 years. This could actually be over 5 years, could be over a longer period. And if you think the game's going to continue growing, which by the way, is like the only reason to invest in the games when they're not profitable today, that number might look a lot smaller 5 years from now than it does today. The other thing is, he's marketable. Like, he's well spoken. He speaks good English. Is perfectly like normal, good looking guy. Sure. Like you can put him on in your commercials. No one's gonna have a problem with that. So like from that perspective, he's valuable to use in just like marketing sponsorship perspective, which still runs the whole industry. It's worth keeping in mind. And then the third thing is like, he's, as far as I can tell, he's just a very likable guy. I think I've never heard anybody say they wouldn't want to play with him. He's first of all a very good player. I think he's been somewhere in the top 20, top 10 for the last couple of years globally, and like he easily fits into like almost any team. I think the way he plays. So like he potentially has a lot of places to go. Likable, like doesn't have like I don't think like a strong, challenging personality based on what I've heard. So like easy to get along with. Like that just makes him somebody that's going to garner a lot of interest from a lot of different places. And if you have him under contract, I don't know how long it's for, but like if it's more than a year, it's
less than that. It's supposed to be about like this part, like I say, 8 or 9 months left, I think.
I mean, look, in any case, like if you're Mouse, let's say you get offered 500 today. What do you have left? You sell ropz. What do you have left? You're effectively just taking whatever the payment is, has to be enough to either rebuild your roster or just completely accept that you're just not going to be very relevant in the immediate future. Because I don't think Mouse would be if they let go of ropz. I think he's the guy. And there might also be keyman clauses to some of their sponsorships. So a lot of the time when on teams like that, like I think ropz clearly has been the most marketable, most valuable player from sponsorship perspective on mouse sports, similar to how you would think like Fallen on MIBR, for example. Simple on Navi, it's almost certain that many of the sponsorship deals that those teams have keyman clauses tied to the players, because really they want to sponsor that player and they want the extra media value from the broadcast tournaments, etc. But they really care about that one player. And if you let go of that one player, sponsoring Navi becomes very different if Simple's not there.
Yes.
Sponsoring mouse sports becomes very different if ropz is not there. So then what you're trading on is, one, he might only have 8 or 9 months left. He might even be saying today that he probably won't resign. He probably will want to go somewhere else. Well, like, how is Mouse doing? I think they're probably, I would guess, ahead where most people thought they were going to be after the latest roster changes. So like you might be banking on just showing a little bit more progress over the next, 3 to 4 months. Again, like we said at the top of the call, it's a couple of good results away from saying, hey, why don't we extend for a little bit more? We'll overpay you. So, like you feel like you're compensated. Maybe you think the fair number is X, will pay you 50% more for this like 6-month period to give this project more time. And then like, if you still want to go, like, we'll find a way to get you to another team. Like that. There's all these other considerations. And I think especially in Mouse's case, like how important do you think Counter-Strike is to Mouse relative to the other properties that they're in esports?
I mean, it seems like the biggest game to them. It seems like, what their whole... to me, if your team's like Mouse Sports, Fnatic, you might have other games as well, but CS is an integral part of your identity,
So then, what do you think happens to your company if you effectively, not shut down, but take a really big step back for your biggest game? My guess is you're not renewing your current sponsorships at a premium the next time around. And what's absolute death for, VC backed or, not necessarily VC, but similarly growth investor, family office type backed companies is that you stop growing. And that's what you can't really afford, or what at least will make your life a lot harder. So there's a lot more, I think a lot more relies on some of these, just couple of players on these big teams that I think people give credit for. And I think there's a lot more leverage in play and a lot more factors than whatever is happening right there and then. And I think the community at large generally tends to focus on what does it say for the last 3 months? How did they do in the last 2 tournaments? And what is the probability that they do a lot better? And I think that's just short-sighted and just misses the big picture in a lot of ways.
When we come to the idea of basically who is the one who's not making the right move here, and basically it goes like this. Let's say we're in a scenario like I just described, a player that in theory, if you could get the money, you want to sell because you can just get so much money. As you say, you could retool your whole roster. You could maybe even replace him with a player who's 80% as good, who's an up-and-comer, and then you get another player. Maybe it can be what actually makes your team better. And then you've got the factor that the teams that want to sign him, he's the last piece, so they want him because it could be, it can turn a team that's 7th and all right now into the number 1 team or the contender, and, for the major, you could be ready. Right, here's what I want to know. Say you are on something like that. There's 8-9 months left, right? Both sides can play the leverage game there, right? Because what you said earlier, but it's only they'll say publicly, the teams that want the guy to sign or the players that want him to sign will go, he's only got 6 months left. Then why are you saying that and not waiting 6 months to get him for free? Exactly, cocksucker, because you want him now. So actually, you've made it the other way around. You've tried to project publicly that they're the one under the gun, but you're the one under the gun. So here's my question. I want to see where you come down on it. I can see it both sides. Essentially, it is a game of chicken. If you're the people from the team that want to sign ropz, technically, if you can wait out the whole contract and no one buys him, you can get him for free and spend all that money on his salary, buy another player. Yeah, there's a world where it eventually flips and you become the power player. In fact, by the way, when there's about 2 or 3 months left on that contract, assuming someone else doesn't panic buy him, now Mouse Sports become the people with the sword of Damocles, because if they want some money, they've got to sell him. If they wait 3 months to get nothing. Now, the other side of it, obviously, is if you're actually the guys who, let me think how I'd phrase this. I think I basically said it there. If your mouse spots, it can affect you. But also, if you're the team that needs to buy now, that also might be the case. Maybe you don't want to wait that many months because then someone else can come up with the number. They can have the bad result. That means they need to buy him and they spend the 200k extra. How do you weigh it up in that regard? Because this is the tricky part. Fans will just think, I want him to join, or the worst one ever is he says he wants to join. Obviously, those factors should almost never factor into the deal part of it, So where do you come down on how you play the game of waiting out or selling at the highest, the little bit of chicken there that goes on?
It's like playing poker. You're not playing the hand, you're playing the other person, I think. So one, what you've done previously will have an impact on what you can do going forward, and therefore what you're doing now will also have an impact on your dealings going forward. So, for example, I think I have a reputation that I'm pretty direct. I say what I think, and then I'm not necessarily going to change my opinion from there. And I think
not that much wiggle room, right?
Yeah. So I think people respect that sooner than they might with somebody else. There has been situations where we've sold some of the big name players, and the management of another team will have called me and said, hey, here's a really big number, one of the biggest numbers of all time, and we know the guy won't play, he wants to move. Can we make a deal? And I said, no, the number is this, and when you get to this number, we can talk, and before then, we should not talk because we're not going to change our view. And then be click. And if you wait a couple of weeks and you start, and then there's the question, can you continue waiting? Are you going to be the one who goes back and say hey, about that offer, in which case, no, the ball's in their court, they have the leverage? Or are you actually okay just sitting back, and will you actually just trust the process, like that you get the result that you should have. And, you're not going to always win. I think in big grand scheme of things, so like in terms of bigger buyouts, I think it's worked out really well for us historically. But there's been a couple of smaller name players that we've had on the roster where like that hasn't worked out. And you don't always win, but like I think a lot of it just comes down to your negotiation style and then like the reputation that you have, and also just understanding where the other team is and what they're thinking. For example, there might be a situation where you just know that there's somebody else on that team who's pushing for a roster change. And it could be that their contract is up and they're not willing to sign a deal unless, some change happens. And therefore, that actually you have all the leverage because you're getting help from the inside, just almost by accident. So, there's like countless different factors like that go into it. Ultimately, you play the other person and you play to some extent your hand, but in many of these situations, eventually you will get to a point where the player will just say publicly, like, I won't ever play for this team again, like just make a deal. And we've been pretty open with some of the players who have wanted to bench themselves, for example, and said like they don't want to play with this team anymore. I've been very open with them and said like, listen, like, you have the right to do that. And like, if you want to do that, that's fine. But like, I don't want to hear you coming to me in 2 months complaining about this. So I'm just telling you now, there's a chance that you sit on the bench for the next 18 months. And like, if that happens, then like, it sucks for your career, but we're willing to do that. So like, don't act surprised in 4 months if nothing's happened. And like,
actually, this is a topic I want to get in on. Here's the thing.
That's what we've said from the beginning. And like, some people have gotten frustrated as time has gone by. And I'm sure you've heard of some of those, but that's kind of how you have to play it.
Let me expand on exactly that topic, because that was actually where I wanted to go next, which goes, that's all the fans focus on. Because remember, let's face it, they are fans of the players, they're fans of big players, and they want to see great Counter-Strike, and they want to see players go to players. By the way, I get it. Before I knew about business at all, I used to be the same pleb in the NBA. Of course, I want every small market team to give up their star to go and make a fucking super team with the player I like, so they win the shot. Of course, we all understand that, right? But it doesn't interact with business. Now, the problem is, as you've just alluded to, the area it does in esports, and the reason why I have so little respect for a lot of the GMs in this business, is they actually all tend to fall for what you've just described in most cases I've heard, which basically goes like this. If the player internally says, not only do I want to leave, but I don't even want to stay, so I won't play properly. Essentially, they say, like, I'll fuck your team up and sabotage you, but not in as many words, What do you say?
The James Harden.
Yeah, basically, but they'll say it. And then obviously the really egregious ones are the ones where they will publicly state also, like, I don't want to play for this team and I want to leave. Now, when they do that, right, to a fan, and even some people in the industry, and this really disappoints me, they just go, well, if he's not going to play properly, what would the point in keeping him be? You have to just sell him then. As though, by the way, that's just instantly created leverage where a player who's eligible wants to leave, the other team wants him, all the balls should be in your court. You're now supposed to just give him away for free or very cheap because he wants to leave in that scenario. Now, I will say in this situation, the reason why I blame the GMs, not even the players, because at the end of the day, the players exist at the leisure of the team orgs that they've signed for. They don't have the power to actually do these things. As you say, very few people actually will discipline that player. A lot of people even will just bend over backwards and try and get him out of there. Like, I've heard stories where it's like, this is like your best player and you're winning tournaments. And he's like, yeah, but he wanted to leave, so what was the point in keeping him if he's not motivated? I had to sell him to the other team. It's like one of your rival teams. So I even think in that regard, GMs should actually stop being pussies and they should put their foot down, because if I'm paying a guy $30,000 a month and I have a competent team, it might not be as good as the one he wants to play for. You can be a professional for 6 months and just play out the game. Like, you might not like it, but you can play it out. And by the way, if you don't, this is why people need to put their foot down. As lurppis says, if I bench you, enjoy watching that value go down the fucking drain. Enjoy watching people who wanted to sign you now forget about you and start thinking about other players that they're playing against in the tournaments. And all of a sudden, not only does that value tank, once you get towards the end of the contract, you're not going to be worth as much anyway. Maybe then I do let you go, but you know what? You've forced us both in a bad situation. We can both lose in that situation. It can benefit neither. So what do you think on that? Because it's not just your teams. It sounds like in your team, you've done a pretty good job sort of knowing where the line in the sand is. But I've heard way too many stories where the GM made, I guess, like they don't know their own job. They make it sound like I had to let him go because he said he didn't want to stay, Well,
I mean, look, there's times when, so in some of those GM's defense, what I will say is, a lot of the time, their purview over the company will be a lot smaller than mine, for example. So for them, they're semi-immediate paycheck might depend on like not completely blowing everything up. Whereas I think, I think
You've
I
blown it up a few
can,
times.
and I think people like Jason Lake, for example, like he knows that he's not being judged over the next 3 months, but rather, longer time period. So like you have more lenience in what you're going to do about it. The other thing is that like you have to think about things from a bigger picture point of view. So, if you operate teams even outside of Counter-Strike, it's very likely that if you're selling a Counter-Strike player to one of the other top organizations, that you're, before long, you'll be talking about player transfers with that same organization in another game, right? Like many of the organizations playing the same sandboxes. And if you do that, if you kind of give up your edge in one game, you've now given it up all across the board. So it also has implications for other games. Like
I think you're a soft touch, basically.
Yeah. So like, you might lose the battle sometimes, even if you do the right thing, but ideally that's what lets you win the war. So it might be that sometimes you have to take a loss on something, but like it's a bit like, bluffing and just showing the bluff sometimes lets you play differently going forward. So in those GM's defense, sometimes they don't necessarily have the approval, or that they're just like, their focus is just this rather than this. So they can't think about it the same way. What was the other thing you mentioned?
Basically, it's the idea that like the players trying to force their way out, and what they essentially do is they just hold you hostage. They say, I just won't play properly, or I don't care, or bench me, or whatever, and that's not. Because by the way, the thing about that is, I know to a fan, they're like, that's their prerogative. It's like, it's pretty fucking rude though, isn't it? You did sign a 10-year period and say, I'm going to play this particular period of time. And also, we're talking enormous sums of money. They might want you to take a $300,000 discount while still paying them to play in your until that point. Like, some of this is like, players eventually have got to realize this isn't fucking business, and it isn't just like a bit daddy Warbucks just shelling out money for them to have fun playing CS.
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, people certainly view it differently. And like, by the way, like basically any single player, like virtually every single Counter-Strike player, I think there's maybe 5 exceptions, could at any time pretty easily find their way to whatever team they wanted if, and here's the big if they were willing to give on some of it. But usually it's both orgs that have to give on some of it. Both of them, one of them will have to pay a little bit more than they want to pay. The other org will have to accept a little bit less than they would want to accept. And, there's usually other dealings in there where they're just like the PR impact, et cetera, or like, impact on your business, whatever the case that is. It's usually not the player who comes up and says like, hey, you know what? I'll take 50% salary for the first year. I'll give you the first $200,000 that I win in prize money. I don't know if that has happened, but I suspect not. So like you said, it's the players usually want to have their cake and eat it too.
Yes.
And like, it's player empowerment era, I think, also in sports now. And I think in that respect, esports has actually been a little bit ahead of sports, in the sense that I just think everywhere people care more about, the couple of names. It's like a influencer world now. Like, people don't really care about watching Bit or Perfecto. They want to watch Simple. Yes. People don't care about watching Grim. They want to watch Elige. Like, that's the world. Like, I don't care who the players 4 through 8 on the nets are. I'm turning the TV on tomorrow because I want to watch KD play. And I think, it becomes more and more like that. The upside is that the couple of players have more leverage to some extent. On the other hand, like, there is a point in time where if you push that too much, how much is that player actually going to be worth to you? Like, how are you going to justify paying, let's say, $1 million in buyouts to get somebody on your team who refuses to suit up for their previous organization because they just don't like the roster, don't like something else that hasn't happened? Not necessarily anything wrong, just something that they would just prefer not to be a part of for whatever reason, competitive performance or otherwise. How do you assume that that's not going to happen to you someday? You might have the good team now. You might think they're going to put you over the top, and like, maybe that's worth the risk by itself. It might be. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's not. But you are taking on the same risk of that happening to you later on. It's like you talk to someone, you ask them about their previous whatever experience, and when it's all bad, can pretty safely assume that if your thing ever ends, it'll be the exact same thing.
Yes.
At that later time.
By the way, I would just say, shout out KNG there, mate. Think about it, mate. How many times are you going to be in these scenarios? Like, you haven't really thought that one through. Because again, it doesn't at the moment, by the way. A lot of teams are letting you get away with it. But one of these days, when you have all the competent GMs, they're just going to hear these stories. It's going to be the equivalent of the background check. You go and ask the old guy's boss, and you find, I mean, apparently in America, in some states, that's illegal. But in Europe, by the way, people definitely going to do that. And also, no one's going to court. But here's the thing I want to switch to, right? I want to ask about agents, and I want to present something to you. So there have obviously been, over the last few years, a number of players getting their own individual agent. It's not just the teams that are negotiating now. Now, here's the thing. Just like every other fucker in the space, as if there wasn't enough problems with money and things being inflated, good old agents have had to come in and get super predatory and pump their rates the fuck up. I'll just present a scenario to you that is a real scenario, Tommy. It is happening right now with some of the biggest players in the game, some of the biggest names, and what in theory should be legit people as the agents. And this is the approach they're taking. They're taking what they claim is the approach that happens in European soccer, in football, right? Which is that it's not about like, I get like a percentage or I get like this fee at the beginning. It's about when you offer a contract, right? I get, say, make the number up, 10, 15, 5. I get a certain percentage of the total contract value. So to make it very quick for people, if they haven't figured it out there, if you basically have 10K a month salary, I get 10% of that, so I get 1K a month. But then if you sign a 2-year deal, I get 24,000. Obviously, I almost fucked that one. I get 24K as my signing part of this arrangement, right? Listen, they say it's from football, and that's what goes on there. By the way, not only do I hate it happens in football, but secondly, for my basic inquiries, football's like the most corrupt sport in the entire world. But okay. What do you think of this like agent approach? Like, is it reasonable? Can you see it? What are your thoughts on it and the impact it might have on the industry?
Well, the funny thing is that there's it's like the classic example of the principal agent problem, which works by name too, is when you have a deal that is structured like that, given that your ongoing success isn't aligned with that of the agents, your agent is probably not going to want the same things that you would want going forward. So, I mean, in theory,
he just wants the biggest contract, right? No matter what team it is.
Well, not only that, but the agent, for their incentives, for them to maximize their income, they would actually want you to change teams all the time. So let's just say, let's just say you're an up and coming player. I'm your agent. I have that fee structure. We'll play both. So, you think that you're good enough to join. We'll talk to some of the teams that we mentioned earlier, Mouse Sports.
Yes.
I tell you that no. I'm you're an 18-year-old player. You're a young guy. You don't have a lot of experience. I'm someone older. I've been around the industry for a long time. You trust my view. You believe that I'm giving you good advice given my experience, etc. And because I'm your agent. So what I tell you is, you know what, Duncan? You should not go to Mouse, even though it's a better team, a better organization, and it'll give you more opportunities. You should instead join this worse team that's going to pay you about the same, maybe a little bit more. And then I get you to sign with that team for a little bit more money. I get paid my 10% of the total value. I make you sign, that I negotiated such that the team signs you for 2 years instead of a year because, they need time to let you grow, blah, 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 build around you, maybe even 3 years. Now I'm getting a big signing bonus when you sign there. And then 3 months later, it becomes obvious that, hey, actually, you should be in Mouse Sports. Maybe you should be on a better team. Maybe you should be on, FaZe. Maybe you should be on, maybe they're not better now. Maybe you should be on G2. Then that's actually better for me if I can get you moved there than it is for me to get you to that team from day one. It's better for you and your career if you go straight to the better team, get the better opportunity and more money. But it's better for me to have you cycle through a worse team so I can get my big signing bonus. Now, on the other hand, let's just say we just have a flat percentage-based cut. So any dollar you make, I get 5% from, 10% from, name your number. So you win 100K in prize money, I'm taking 10K. You get paid 10K a month, I'm taking 1,000. Anything else, I get paid my 10%. Now, all of a sudden, what I want is for you to make as much money as possible, which means a high salary and a team that's going to be able to win so that you can get big sponsorships, you can win prize money, you can make money through all these other, potential revenue streams, which actually is what you would want too, because that's a pretty good proxy, generally speaking, for success in a competitive sport. It's more like if how well you do.
Instead of a sports contract, that's more like something you'd have if you were like a Hollywood actor, it sounds like, because that way, again, that's where you're going to try and get me the big movies. You're going to want me to go to the right places because you're getting a cut of every bit I make. You're incentivized to make yourself money by making me money, right?
Yeah, exactly. And, if I do that, then it's actually not in my best interest for you to keep shuffling. Because if you go to that worst team first, I'm getting my percentage of that. And then you go to the new team and I start getting my percentage of that. Like, why do I want to spend more time working on an extra change and put you through another team, which will make you look like somebody who just changes teams a lot instead of someone who's able to commit and be happy in a situation, etc. It just opens up a lot of these misaligned incentives where it doesn't mean that the agent, by the way, is going to do that or abuse the situation or not do what's best for you. But you should never start from a situation that is set up such that it's in their best interest to do something that is not in your best interest. And I think that's especially true in a relationship like agent-player in esports, where the players tend to be youngsters with limited real-world experience.
Yes.
And the agents tend to be the more experienced, former industry professionals who have been around the block and kind of know how things work. I just think it's ripe for abuse, and whether or not it's led to problems so far, I think if the practice keeps up, it will lead to problems. I think there's just no way around it. Somebody's going to come around and figure out a way to kind of abuse some promising young player for more money, and they're going to do it. And that's why you don't build structures like that.
Look, I understand if this was like the NFL, the fucking NBA, European soccer, where the big teams can be, making enormous revenues, massive profits potentially, especially because, by the way, a spoiler, in real sports, you just offset all your fucking losses and liabilities against the city, the fucking fans. It's mad the way you can basically offset. You can't in esports, of course. You just get the sponsor money and you get the VC money, and then you play Monopoly and then you see who wins. Now, the problem I have is this. Players already have outrageous expectations for salary, and they always want to make more when they go to the next team, and they always think they're worth more because they stupidly think it's based on how good they are in the game. And then teams are in a scenario where the whole reason projects like Flashpoint were done is that some of them don't think the revenues are high enough, and right now maybe there isn't a way to get the revenue higher, and you've got to hope basically someone like Blast and ESL battle each other. You don't want them to work together. There's all these factors going on. The game dev, we haven't had majors in a while. There's not as much money coming into the scene from them. There's a million factors, right, that squeeze in everyone from all sides. So when I see these agents come in, it's just going to add another factor. It's going to mean they come in and they try to gouge their part of it. They try to increase their amount overall, right? Obviously in CS, there are some teams thinking it ain't worth it. There's some that think there are. You gave a good example, I think, on the last episode that, it's a good game to get started in. You can get your name out there and maybe you can do it actually cheaper relative to if you buy a $15 million spot, $10 million spot. In fact, if you see now, because people weren't in at the ground floor franchising, it has doubled, tripled. The spots go crazy now because they're finite supply. It's basically a Bitcoin concept. There's just not that many. You have to go and pay for it, right? So what I would ask is this, does all this stuff, does this agent element, does it somehow turn up the heat on the pressure cooker? Do we get to a point where if there isn't a more reasonable recorrection of the market, as it were, I'm sort of learning the terms here, would it mean that in a year from now, will teams just stop dealing with agents like that? Will more teams say we're just going to out on CS if it's getting this much more expensive and this harder to do it? If players start trying to demand all the trades when it isn't the NBA, our team's just going to let them play God? Won't they just go, if CSGO players are like this, I'll go get, Rainbow Six team or fucking Valorant team, or maybe they don't do that. What do you think the impact is on the industry?
So I think it's unlikely that the agents themselves will have too much of an impact. They'll be optimizing around the edges, and I'm sure they'll prop up the salaries, the extra, 5-10%, but that's not going to really move the needle, I don't think, except for individual cases for the players where the players end up worse off because of advice or whatever, or better off. But in a big picture sense, I don't think the agents will really make a difference. I will say, though, that I think the last year, if you look at the top 20, top 30 teams, and you don't have to focus on the teams that have never played offline. Some of the teams that are now in the top 20, whatever. that have kind of come up during the COVID time and are like solid, not like the Gambits of the world, but like somebody who's kind of hovering around the top 20. But you look at many of those rosters and even towards some of the top teams, and I think it's pretty clear that more and more teams are just like, one, taking control away from the players on the roster, and two, pretty aggressively picking up younger players for the 4th and 5th spots. Because one, I think people have realized that the returns to having like an expensive player who was very good 4 years ago and hasn't necessarily performed particularly well or been much better than the replacement level player who might cost 1/5 of that player. If that's the case, not only should you do that, like, because you'll be better off today, but you actually then have somebody you might develop, somebody who might be around for much longer. If you're like, I think Brokey is an example of somebody who was picked up and is actually developed, and I think most would view as like a core piece of FaZe now, who's turned into a good player. But like, he's really the only one for FaZe, for example. They've always been of the we'll buy many of the big names out mindset, and like that's why they're recycling back Olaf, who is a very good player. If he wanted to play, could easily be still solid player in a top team, but it doesn't seem like he's committed to playing. It's just that he's the one player that's there, and they don't want to go full youngster. But the problem is, at some point you have to do that. If you don't do that, you'll never have any of the young players. And like, that happened with Navi. They picked up Bit as the 6th player, and then the major forced their hand, and turns out Flamey was the one that actually got left out. And I think that's happening more and more. Like, you look at NIP, what happened to, people were surprised when, who did they remove? Twist and whomever earlier in the year? Yeah, and people thought like, what are they doing? And they picked up people from their academy team. And I'm not saying that the players that they have playing are huge difference makers and are going to be the stars of that roster, but I don't think they're making them lose.
And they're probably cheaper by a fucking metric ton.
They probably cost 1/10 of device.
Yes.
If I
and
had
by the way,
guess.
that might even be what allowed you to get device, right?
Exactly. That's what I was going to get to. Right. So now if you want to have 5, let's just say like the Res Twitch type players, like solid players who have been around for number of years now, have done well competitively, have a name to themselves, and like command some level of salary. So if you want to have 5 of those guys, or you want to have a device and like maybe one other better known player and like 3 youngsters, I think a lot of people would go the device route. And I think that's the impact that the salaries are having, one, on the new players. I think if I were sort of like the odd man out on one of the modern top 20 teams, like, I would probably be a little bit worried about my ability to find a new team without just taking a massive step back. And to the extent that we've seen players take those big steps back, I don't know that many of them have come back up. A bunch of players have sort of started playing, even, just like sort of semi-seriously in like random online cups and leagues with like second-tier teams, and I don't know that they've come back up, because actually, particularly in the time of COVID, like, experience is replaceable, and it doesn't make that big of a difference in the current meta. And then I guess the other thing that I would just say on that note is, like, that completely changes how people view Counter-Strike as well, because I don't know that anybody's excited about picking up 5 youngsters, but that makes the team that you would be interested in signing if you're thinking about entering Counter-Strike very different. 2 years ago, many of the top players, I would say, had a lot of control over roster decisions, who they were playing with whom, on what team, etc. And I think going back to, I would say, early 2020, I think there's been a lot of situations, I think, where in the old days, roster changes would have just happened, but the players no longer have the say. Part of it is that they've driven up the salaries themselves, which means buyouts have also gotten driven up. And I think we've talked about this before, but I actually think Counter-Strike, not individually, but like in like team construction terms, I think is actually at like kind of a low level because the talent is dispersed among so many different teams. Whereas, go back a couple years, and I think out of the top 20 teams, the same players would probably play in the top 10. The best ones, that is.
I even looked this up, by the way, because I used the metric of the HLTV top 20, which whether I agree with it or not is, a lot of fans do. And I noticed that over the years, absolutely. Obviously, they would, maybe 6 teams made it up to be with, and then it'd might be 10 last year. It went crazy. Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So, if they the market does kind of solve for that. The players want more salary, fine, but they're giving up say, and they're giving up control, and they're no longer able to get other players to join. They're no longer able to just kind of roam around easily themselves. And there's been players who have actively sold for one another, usually from my experience. Players will say that, hey, I really care about having this or that. And then you say, okay, here's the offer. And they say, no, I want more money. It's okay, the only way I can give you more money is you give on this stuff. Okay, done. That's usually how it works.
Yes.
I will say the one player from my dealings who was different was Tarek, because when he joined MIBR, if you remember, that wasn't very far removed from the time that he was kind of stuck on contract hell on CLG when he wanted to go to Cloud9 for what now is a hilariously low, I think 40K buyout at the time. And he actually agreed. I think he actually himself said that he'd rather take less salary to keep his buyout at a level where if it's not working, he can have effective choice over where he's going to go because the buyout is not going to be excessive. So good for him.
Well, I thought the last topic we could do that's connected to all this that I could ask you about is you've kind of tangentially gone onto it there, but basically the one set of players who are getting the most rude awakening, water into the face in the morning, realization, holy shit, this isn't the industry I thought I was in, are the players who are big names, but they weren't big names in the server at the end, as in they weren't playing very well at a high level. And as you say, it's the online period right now where you can literally get any Tom, Dick and Harry and they might be as good as you now, and you can't even apply all those things. The veteran edge, he plays on stage, he'll come back when he's motivated because all these factors aren't there. So imagine I told you a month before we went to online play, this list of players either aren't starters or literally don't have teams. Imagine I told you coldzera, Kenny S, Guardian, Woxic, Flusher, all either on a bench about to go nowhere or literally don't have a team, and have some of them been waiting months and months and months, and as a result some of them are even in that position, that fucked up Valorant one where the NA players please don't send me to Valorant, cut me from the team, because the joke is after so many months you start out, a bunch of those NA ones did, they do the tweet, I don't want to go to Valorant guys, I'm staying in CS. 3 months later, look, I have to have fucking money to live, I have to play, and then they go to Valorant, right? So I think a lot of these names, dude, I've had some of them messaging me oh, where can I go? Who can I? And I said, your problem is, mate, the image is shit. The optics are terrible on this. They know you're not going to come for cheap. You're going to at least want a decent salary because in your brain, you still think you're worth that because you're thinking, I'm going to get back in shape in 3 months, 4 months, whatever. And you think I've got a big name, etc. But as I say, it doesn't really count right now. These people, there's a reason you haven't seen them signed. A lot of them have been in the all plano situation where they all thought, I could make a team, I can join this team. Someone's going to offer me. And sad thing is they aren't. And because guess what? That's where all these young players are coming from. They're replacing you. They're taking your spot, and as we say, the gamble is that we're cheaper.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I think that's a good point. I obviously don't want to go into any level of detail about the Plano MIBR
situation. Just an example.
But
yeah, sure.
That was one where we obviously disagreed on value. The way we wanted to bridge that was we said here are the levels. You get this ranking, this ranking, this ranking. You get paid more. They wanted to get paid more, just guaranteed, and that was the fundamentally big difference. I would say. I think that the levels were also different, but fundamentally it's a question of that. And when you you've just got to take the risk that I think that that might happen. I think from my dealing in that situation, I honestly thought that I think they thought they had 100% leverage. And there was no chance that we would actually walk.
Right.
And it's it's a sad situation in some ways, I think. But we actually meant it when we said that this was where we were going to go, and we were not going to be able to go elsewhere. And I think the market for Counter-Strike teams is very different today, and has been for the last year and a half than it was 2 years ago, 3 years ago. And the other thing that I think players don't necessarily appreciate, and I understand why they don't think about this from this angle. Like they don't get paid to do that. They get paid to get paid to be very good at the video game and like be marketable, etc. All these other things, not to think about the business side of things. But like when you want to get paid more, that also means that there's more pressure. So I know you sometimes joke about people who complain about, reading Twitter and getting flamed over, playing poorly, whatever. And like we'll put the mental health side of that because I think that's a real concern.
Yeah, of course.
But from just like, hey, like I just don't like people complaining at me perspective, like, you get paid a lot of money. Like the expectation is higher.
Yes,
you might remember there's the text that's on top of the Red Wings, like the entrance to the Red Wings locker room says something like, to whom much is given, much is expected,
right,
something like that. And like that's the case. Like, if I'm paying you and your team 10 grand a month, all of you, and you have 6 months of bad results, like as long as like I trust you and you think you're about to get better and figure it out, just let it ride and like see what happens. If I'm paying you 30 grand a month, I'm probably not letting you just kind of play around for 6 months with poor results, even if you're telling me that like we're this close to cracking it wide open. And I think that's the I think there's going to be a time when many players realize that they would actually want to have more control rather than a little bit more money. And I think there's going to be some player who's going to be smart, and that's like they're gonna end up making like some big changes or something that end up really being their thing. As in, like, somebody will sign for less money. It'll actually become a thing that they sign for less money, but in exchange for some level of control, etc. And then other players, because players always talk, they're going to find out about it. They'll probably see that worked out at least to some extent, or that people were happy about it, and that might become a trade-off that people are more willing to make in the future. But as I said, like, I've dealt with a lot of players in contract negotiations, and from my experience, the thing they care about is at that point in time
salary.
And nothing else, including the things that they're gonna that they're gonna be unhappy about. But like if they if that's what they say, like what are you gonna do? And like, by the way, that's why I actually wish that more players had good agents who had their interest at heart and like were smart about explaining them how to think about things, etc. Because I think it would be very helpful to have somebody kind of walk, some of the, youngsters through like how to think about some of these things. Like, I understand if you're 17, 18, you get an opportunity to make, in many of these cases, like more money than your parents had ever made, like maybe more money than both of your parents had ever made combined at like 17 years old, like, before you graduate even high school. Like, I understand why you might just want to take money over everything else. But it could be, for example, that as part of that, you're signing up to do just like an insane amount of like activation work.
Yes.
For example,
or some bullshit. Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Like maybe every single week you have to do like in-person activations, like all these shoots, whatever. And maybe the people who know you would have been able to tell you ahead of time that, like, by the way, you're going to absolutely hate all of this. Like, you're going to hate having to stream. You're going to think it makes you worse as a player because you don't like streaming. But now you have to do it 20 hours a week, every week. And you say, well, I just want the money. So you take it. But guess what? Like, the trade, the way that's going to be presented to the team later on is never that, hey, let's pare back the streaming and pare back the cash. It's, can we pare back the streaming so that I can be better? Yes. And like, again, like from a player's perspective, maybe that gets them what they wanted, which is less streaming and more money. But that is the long-term issue. And generally speaking, just the kind of example of where I think players, if they got better advice at the time of signing deals, they would get what they actually want. And like, I think you would agree that there is some level of money after which the incremental $1,000, $2,000 a month on your bank account, like, you like it, you'd like to have more of it, it's great, but ultimately, like, you might value having an extra hour of free time more than that.
Yeah, I always say it like this. Once you've hit the threshold, you think at the beginning, because you don't have it yet, oh, yeah, I'll do whatever. Yeah, whatever, streaming activations. But what you don't realize is, if it really sucks whatever you're doing, the money, money isn't like, it's not like a video game where it's like, there's a figure above your head and it has a feedback loop of like, right, I'm making this much for doing it, this much for doing it, this much for doing it. It's not even like actually like fucking World of Warcraft. You're not getting like a gold coin every time you do a little task. To you, it's like, right, well, I get paid that anyway. What, I have to do all these extra things? Like, it just becomes something that sucks. And at the end of the day, you only actually realise the extra money you made when you look at the bank statement at the end of the month. So it doesn't actually give you the satisfaction you think. Like, I know plebs will go, you just do it for that. It's like, no, if you put it this way, if you would, I know it sounds mad, but if you wouldn't do it like semi for free, you probably don't want to be building it into your contract. You probably want to, as you say, structure it so it's like, look, I'm just a guy who wants some money, but I also want to be like really good at the game and I only want to practice. Then let's make a deal like that, like you're saying. Maybe it's not even that much. Maybe it is just 2k less a month, but in exchange for that, I won't make you do all these extra, like maybe you don't have to do every one of those betting things that are over underrated or what. Like, you know, I'll let you skip that because that's not your thing. But yeah, the idea here is a lot of teams have let people get away with it, but there's got to be give. Like, you got to basically, like, we've got to somehow meet in the middle on that, like professionals. I agree. Oi! This video was kindly supported by Eddie, Kris with a K, Lager15, Pronogo, Shenlong, Zachary Carter, Zack Schmidt, Adam Ochs, Alexander Rao, Animosity, Dean Tanglis, Doomseer, ErikHillestad, Hades, Jdubs, Jensen Goh, John Shelton, Joseph Ginsburg, Kovacevicd, Tobias Bernasconi, Zoomba, and Zyrathenia. And as always, special thanks go out to my main man, Jerky's Minion. Want to suggest a topic or a guest? Do you want to ask a question in one of those AMAs? Do you want teasers? See who the guests are? Maybe you want to take part and chat with me in one of those esports discussions. Well, for all of the above, put your money where your mouth is, join the Patreon link in the description box below, and become a part of the Skrilluminati.